Don't let them find me." The words barely made it past his lips before he stumbled forward, his hand gripping the edge of the service door like it was the only thing holding him to this world, rain pouring down in sheets across the empty alley behind Larkspur Grill, the kind of upscale Manhattan restaurant where people wore watches worth more than rent and never looked twice at the staff, and Naomi Carter almost didn't look either, almost kept walking. Her shift finally over after 10 straight hours on her feet, her sneakers damp, her apron folded in her bag, her mind already halfway on the subway ride home, but something in his voice stopped her, not loud, not commanding, just human, fragile in a way she had learned to recognize, because she had heard it before in hospital waiting rooms, in late-night phone calls, in moments when people realized they were no longer in control, and when she turned, really turned. She saw him clearly under the flickering security light, his suit soaked through, his breathing uneven, not dramatic, not cinematic, just wrong, like something was quietly slipping out of place, and for a second the city itself seemed to pause, the distant hum of traffic fading into the rain, the neon reflections trembling across the pavement, and Naomi felt that familiar pull, the one that asked a simple question with a complicated cost, walk away or step in. Because people like her didn't get second chances when they made the wrong call, people like her learned to keep their heads down, to mind their business, to survive, but still she moved, slow at first, cautious, closing the distance between them as he lost his grip and sank down against the wall, his eyes barely open now, searching for something she couldn't see, and she knelt beside him, her hand steady even as her thoughts raced, checking his pulse the way she remembered from a class she once took but never got to use, adjusting his position so he could breathe easier, her voice low and calm even though no one else was around to hear it, telling him to stay with her, telling him he was okay even though she didn't know that for sure, because sometimes words weren't about truth, they were about giving someone a reason to hold on, and for a moment he looked at her, really looked, like he was trying to memorize her face in case it was the last one he saw, and then his eyes closed, not dramatic, not final, just heavy, and Naomi exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment settling in, because whatever happened next would not be small. Not for her, not for him, not for the quiet line she had just crossed without even realizing it, and somewhere in the distance, a siren echoed through the city. Too far away to matter, too late to make the decision for her. Because now his life, at least for this moment, rested entirely in the hands of someone the world had taught him never to notice. The rain did not slow and neither did her thoughts as Naomi slid her arm under his shoulder and pulled him just enough to keep him upright, the cold seeping through his jacket into her sleeve, his weight heavier than she expected but not impossible, not yet, and she glanced once toward the street where yellow cabs passed without noticing, headlights slicing through water and shadow, then back to him, to the shallow rhythm of his breathing that told her time mattered even if no clock was ticking. Out loud, and she made a decision that would not look smart to anyone watching, but no one was watching, not really, because people like her were invisible until they were not, and she shifted her stance and guided him through the service door into the narrow hallway that smelled faintly of bleach and leftover heat from the kitchen, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, too bright, too honest, revealing details she did not want to see but had to, the tremor in his hands, the way his focus slipped in and out like a signal struggling to connect, and she spoke again, steady, grounded, telling him to keep breathing, telling him he was inside now, telling him he was safe even though safety was a word this city handed out carefully, and she eased him onto a chair near the prep counter, her mind mapping steps the way she had learned to do when things went wrong, not panic, not freeze, just act, find what you need, use what you have, and she moved quickly, grabbing clean towels, a first aid kit tucked beneath the sink, water from a pitcher that had been set aside for staff, everything simple, everything ordinary, but in moments like this ordinary became enough, and as she worked her hands stayed precise, gentle, efficient, not asking permission, not waiting for approval, because there was no one to give it, and somewhere between one breath and the next his features softened, the tension in his jaw easing just slightly, and she noticed then the details that did not belong in her world, the cut of his suit, the watch on his wrist, the kind of quiet luxury that did not announce itself but never needed to, and something in her tightened, not fear, not exactly, but recognition, the kind that comes when two different worlds collide in a place neither was meant to be, and she pushed the thought aside because it did not matter yet. What mattered was the present, the rhythm of his breathing, the steadiness of her hands, the choice she had already made and could not take back. And outside the storm continued to press against the building like it wanted in, But inside, in that narrow strip of light and tile, something shifted, something unseen, as if the balance of power had quietly tilted, not in a way anyone could measure, not in dollars or titles or influence, but in something simpler, something harder to earn, because for the first time in a long time, the man who owned boardrooms and signatures and entire industries was no longer in control, and the woman who carried plates and cleared tables without being seen was the only reason he was still here, holding on to a moment he would not even remember clearly, not yet, but one that would follow him long after the rain stopped. Time moved differently in that narrow kitchen, not in minutes or hours but in breaths, in small shifts of awareness, in the quiet space between one heartbeat and the next, and Naomi stayed close, seated on the cold tile floor beside him, one hand resting lightly near his shoulder as if the simple presence could anchor him, could keep him from slipping too far into whatever place his mind was trying to retreat to, and every so often he stirred. Not fully awake, not fully gone, just caught somewhere in between, murmuring fragments of words that never formed into sentences, his voice stripped of authority, stripped of control, and she realized then that whatever world he came from, whatever power he held out there beyond these walls, it meant nothing in here, not tonight, not in this moment, because here he was just a man who needed help, and she was the only one there to give it, and the thought settled into her chest with a quiet weight. Not pride, not fear, something steadier, something closer to purpose, and she adjusted the towel beneath his head, making sure he stayed comfortable, making sure his breathing remained even, her movements careful, deliberate, the kind of care that came not from obligation but from choice, and for a moment she leaned back against the cabinet behind her, exhaling slowly, letting the silence stretch, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant echo of rain against the alley door, and in that silence her mind wandered. Not far, just enough to remind her of the world waiting outside this one, the unpaid bills on her kitchen counter, the early shift she was supposed to take in less than 6 hours, the manager who would not ask why she looked tired, only why she was late, and she almost laughed at the thought, almost, because this was not the kind of night that fit into schedules or expectations, this was the kind of night that rewrote them entirely, and then he shifted again, his hand moving slightly, brushing against hers, not intentional, not aware, just human, and she froze for half a second, not because of the contact, but because of what it represented, a connection neither of them would have chosen in any other circumstance, a crossing of paths that should not have happened, and yet here they were, bound together by a moment that neither money nor status could have predicted, and slowly his eyes opened, not fully clear, not fully focused, but enough to see her, really see her, and for a brief second there was confusion in his gaze, then something softer, something searching. As if he was trying to understand how he had ended up here, how the world had shifted so suddenly without his permission, and she met his gaze without hesitation, calm, steady, offering nothing more than presence, because sometimes that was all a person needed, not answers, not explanations, just someone who did not look away, and he tried to speak, his voice rough, uncertain, forming a single question that barely made it into the air, "Where am I?" And Naomi tilted her head slightly, her voice quiet but firm as she answered, "You are safe," and for the first time since he had appeared at that door, the tension in his face eased, just enough to matter, just enough to show that somewhere deep inside, beneath the layers of control and expectation and power, he believed her. He held on to that word longer than she expected, safe, as if it carried more weight than anything else he had ever been told, and Naomi could see it in the way his shoulders eased, not completely, not fully relaxed, but enough to show that something inside him had chosen to trust her, even without knowing her name, her story, or why she had decided to help him at all, and for a man who likely controlled every variable in his life. That kind of surrender did not come easily, not without reason. And yet here it was, unfolding quietly in a back kitchen that no one important ever saw, and she shifted slightly, giving him space while still staying close enough to steady him if he needed it, her eyes watching every small change, every flicker of awareness returning to him, and he blinked slowly, trying to piece things together, his gaze moving across the room, the stainless steel counters, the stacked plates, the dim overhead light, none of it familiar, none of it belonging to his world. And then his eyes landed back on her, sharper this time, more present, and there was a question there, not just where he was, but how he had gotten here, how someone like her had become the one standing between him and whatever had been waiting outside that door, and she could feel the shift in the air, the moment when confusion begins to turn into realization, and realization into something else, something heavier, and he tried to sit up, instinct taking over before his body could agree, and She reached out gently, not forcing, just guiding, letting him know without words that he did not have to rush, that whatever life was waiting for him could wait a little longer, and he paused, his breath catching slightly before settling again, and for a second he looked at her as if he was seeing more than just a person, as if he was seeing the choice she had made, the risk she had taken, and the quiet strength it required to do something without expecting anything in return, and that was when his voice returned, still rough but clearer now, asking the question that mattered more than anything else in that moment, why? And Naomi did not answer right away, not because she did not know, but because the answer was not something that needed explanation, not something that fit into a simple sentence, and instead she gave a small, almost unnoticeable shrug, her expression calm, grounded, as if the question itself was not as important as the outcome, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried the kind of certainty that did not need to be defended, because you needed help, and the simplicity of it seemed to catch him off guard, because in his world nothing was ever that simple, everything came with terms, expectations, transactions, but here, in this space, there had been none of that, just a decision made in a moment when it mattered most, and he looked away for a second, processing something deeper than words, something that did not fit into the structure of control he was used to, and Naomi let the silence settle again, not uncomfortable, not forced, just real, and outside the rain began to ease, the steady rhythm softening into a quieter backdrop, as if the storm itself was stepping back, giving room for something else to take its place, something quieter, something more powerful, the kind of shift that does not announce itself but changes everything anyway. He did not respond right away, but something in his expression shifted again, quieter this time, less about confusion and more about recognition, as if her answer had reached a place deeper than logic, a place he had not visited in years, and Naomi could see it in the way his eyes lingered, not on her uniform, not on the space around them, but on her, as if he was trying to understand how someone he had never noticed before could have just altered the course of his night so completely, and he leaned back slightly, careful now, aware of his own limits, his breath steadier, his voice returning in pieces that felt more grounded, and when he spoke again it was not a command, not a demand, but a question shaped by something unfamiliar. What is your name? And Naomi hesitated for just a fraction of a second, not out of fear but out of habit, because names had a way of changing things, of turning moments into connections, of making something temporary feel real, and she had learned to keep things simple, to move through spaces without leaving traces, but something about this moment did not fit that pattern, and she answered anyway, Naomi, and he repeated it softly, as if testing the weight of it, as if committing it to memory without fully understanding why, and for a brief second there was silence again, but it was different now, less guarded, less distant, and then he looked down at his hands, flexing his fingers slightly as if reminding himself that he was still here, still present, still able to choose what came next, and that was when it happened, not all at once, not dramatically, but in a quiet realization that settled over him like the last drops of rain fading from the roof outside. He understood that this was not just a moment he had passed through, this was a moment that had passed through him, leaving something behind, something he could not ignore, and Naomi saw it before he said anything, saw it in the way his posture straightened just a little, not out of pride, but out of awareness, and when he finally spoke again, his voice carried a different tone, one that belonged to the world he came from, measured, decisive, but now layered with something else, something human. I need to go, and she nodded, not surprised, not disappointed, because she had always known this would end the same way it began, with him moving back into his world and her remaining in hers, and she stood, stepping back to give him space, watching as he carefully rose to his feet, slower this time, more deliberate, and for a moment he swayed slightly before finding his balance, his gaze moving toward the door as if the life waiting beyond it was calling him back, and then he paused, just for a second, turning back toward her. And there was something unspoken in that look, something unfinished, something that neither of them had the words for, and instead of trying to fill it, Naomi simply met his eyes, steady, calm, as if to say that whatever this was, it did not need to be explained, and he nodded once, almost imperceptibly, before reaching for the door, the sound of the storm now reduced to a distant whisper, and as he stepped out into the night, the world outside did not stop for him, did not recognize what had just happened, but something had changed, something that would not stay in that kitchen, something that would follow him long after he left, because for the first time in a long time, control had slipped from his hands, and in its place, something far more powerful had taken hold, something he could not buy, could not command, and could not forget. The door closed behind him with a soft click that felt louder than it should have, and for a moment Naomi just stood there, staring at the empty space he had left behind, as if the air itself had not yet caught up to what had happened, as if something invisible still lingered between the stainless steel counters and the quiet hum of the kitchen, and she exhaled slowly, rolling her shoulders back as the weight of the night settled in all at once. The adrenaline fading, the stillness returning. And just like that, the world began to move again, the ordinary pressing back in where something extraordinary had briefly taken place, and she glanced at the clock above the prep station, the red digits blinking 3:42 a.m., a time that belonged to no one and everyone at the same time, and she let out a quiet breath, realizing how close she was to the start of another day she had not planned for, and yet everything felt slightly different. Not in a way she could explain, but in a way she could feel, like something small had shifted beneath the surface of her life, something that would not show itself right away but would not disappear either, and she moved then, methodical, returning the kitchen to order the way she always did, wiping down counters, stacking towels, placing everything back where it belonged, because that was what you did when things got out of control. You restored what you could, you held on to structure, you reminded yourself that some things still made sense, and as she worked her mind replayed the night in fragments, the sound of his voice at the door, the weight of his presence, the way he had said her name as if it mattered, and she caught herself pausing for a second longer than usual, her hand resting against the counter as she stared at nothing in particular, and she shook it off gently, not allowing herself to drift too far into something that had no place in her reality, because she knew how this worked. She had seen enough of the world to understand that moments like that did not change outcomes. They did not rewrite roles, they simply happened and then passed, leaving behind nothing but memory, and still, something about the way he had looked at her lingered, not gratitude, not obligation, but something quieter, something unresolved, and she finished her work, turned off the overhead lights, and stepped back into the hallway, grabbing her bag as she made her way toward the front exit, the restaurant silent now, empty of the voices and laughter that filled it just hours before, and when she stepped outside, the rain had almost stopped, reduced to a soft mist that clung to the pavement, the city still awake in its own way, distant headlights moving like slow currents through the streets, and she pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders, starting the familiar walk toward the subway station 2 blocks down, her steps steady, grounded, her mind already shifting back to the routine she knew so well, because that was how survival worked. You kept moving, you did not dwell, you did not expect anything to come back to you. And somewhere across the city, far from the quiet streets she walked, a different kind of movement had already begun, doors opening, voices rising, questions being asked in rooms filled with urgency and control, because the man who had disappeared into the night was not someone the world simply forgot, and while Naomi disappeared into the rhythm of her life unseen and uninterrupted, his absence was already making itself known, setting into motion something neither of them could see yet, something that would not remain separate for long. Across the city, the rhythm was different, sharper, faster, measured not in quiet footsteps but in urgency, in voices that did not lower themselves, in rooms where decisions were made before most people even woke up, and Ethan Cole stood at the center of it all again, but something about him no longer fit the space the way it had before, his office on the 42nd floor overlooking a skyline that usually made him feel untouchable, in control, above it all, but this morning the view did not hold him the same way, the glass walls reflecting a man who had walked out of a storm and into a moment he could not explain, and the people around him felt it even if they did not understand it. The slight pause before he answered a question, the way his gaze drifted for half a second too long, the absence of the sharp edge that usually defined every word he spoke, and his assistant stood across from him, tablet in hand, listing off missed calls, delayed meetings, investors asking questions that carried more weight than their words suggested, but he did not respond immediately, his fingers resting lightly against the desk as if he was grounding himself in something real, something steady, and finally he spoke. Not about the meetings, not about the numbers, but about something that did not belong in that room at all, find her, and the words landed differently than anything else he had said that morning, not loud, not dramatic, but absolute, and the assistant hesitated for a fraction of a second, just enough to register the shift, before asking the only question that made sense in a world built on details, who, and Ethan's gaze lifted, not to the skyline, not to the people around him, but somewhere else entirely, somewhere quieter, smaller, more real, and he answered with a clarity that did not need explanation, the woman from last night, and that was all. No last name, no address, no context, just a memory anchored in a moment that had changed something he could not yet define, and around him the room adjusted, because that was what his world did. It adapted to his commands, it moved when he spoke, it turned uncertainty into action, and phones were picked up, instructions given. A network of influence set into motion with a single sentence, but none of it could recreate what had happened in that kitchen, none of it could replicate the simplicity of a decision made without expectation, and as the machine around him began its quiet search, Ethan remained still, his mind returning not to the boardroom, not to the deals waiting to be signed, but to a voice that had said you are safe, a voice that had not needed power to be believed, and for the first time in years, he realized something that did not fit into any report or strategy, something that could not be measured or controlled, that the most important moment of his life had happened in a place where he had no power at all, and the only person who had seen him clearly was someone the world had taught him never to notice. And now, for reasons he could not fully explain, that was the only thing that mattered. The search did not begin with chaos, it began with precision, quiet calls placed from glass offices and black cars moving through the city like shadows with purpose, names checked against employee rosters, security footage reviewed frame by frame, every entrance and exit of Larkspur Grill traced back through the early hours of the morning, because in Ethan Cole's world, nothing stayed unknown for long, not when he decided it mattered. And yet there was something different about this search. Something that did not feel like acquisition or control, something that did not fit the usual pattern of power moving to possess. This was not about ownership, this was about understanding, about finding a moment that had slipped through his fingers and holding it still long enough to make sense of it. And across town, Naomi's world continued exactly as it always had, the subway ride crowded and loud, the scent of coffee and metal filling the air as she stood between strangers who never looked up, her reflection faint in the scratched window, ice-tired but steady, her mind already shifting toward the next shift, the next table, the next version of herself she would have to become to move through another day without being noticed. And when she stepped off onto the platform and climbed the stairs into the pale light of morning, nothing about the city suggested that anything had changed, no headlines, no whispers, just the same rhythm she had always known. And she followed it. Unlocking the door to her small apartment, setting her bag down, moving through familiar motions that required no thought, no hesitation, because routine was the only thing that never betrayed her, and for a moment she paused at the kitchen sink, her hands resting lightly against the edge as she stared out the window at the street below, the memory of the night flickering through her mind not as something dramatic, but as something quiet, something unfinished, and she let it pass, not holding on to it, not expecting it to return, because she had learned that expecting anything from moments like that only led to disappointment. And still, somewhere deep beneath her calm exterior, there was a question she did not ask, a possibility she did not allow herself to consider, because her world did not operate on possibilities, it operated on certainty, and certainty had taught her that people like him did not come back, not for people like her. And miles away, the answers began to take shape, a name attached to a schedule, a face matched to a shift log, a path traced from kitchen to street to subway line, each piece of information building toward a single point of clarity. And when it finally arrived, it did not come with celebration or urgency, just a quiet confirmation delivered into Ethan's hand like any other detail, Naomi Carter, and he read it once, then again, not because he needed to remember it, but because seeing it written made it real in a way memory alone could not. And he stood there for a moment longer than usual, the world around him continuing to move, meetings waiting, decisions piling up, but none of it pulling him away from the one thing that now mattered more than anything else. And when he finally spoke again, his voice carried the same calm authority it always had, but this time it held something deeper beneath it, something that had nothing to do with power. Bring me that woman. The message did not arrive with noise or warning, it arrived the way power always did in Naomi's world, quietly, disruptively, without asking permission, and it began with something simple, a black car parked outside Larkspur Grill just before her evening shift, the kind of car that did not belong on that block unless someone inside it had the authority to place it there. And Naomi noticed it the way she noticed everything, without staring, without reacting, just a brief glance as she adjusted her apron and stepped through the service entrance, letting the routine of the restaurant wrap around her again, the clatter of dishes, the low hum of conversation, the controlled chaos that made her invisible in the best way possible. And for a while nothing happened, tables filled and cleared, orders taken and delivered, the rhythm steady, predictable, safe, until the manager's voice cut through the background. not loud, but sharp enough to shift attention. "Naomi, someone is asking for you," and she paused, just for a second, a small break in motion that no one else would notice. Because no one asked for her, not by name, not like that, and she wiped her hands on a towel, steadying herself in a way she did not fully understand, before stepping out from the kitchen into the hallway that led to the private entrance, the one reserved for guests who did not wait in lines. And when she reached the door, it was already open, held by someone in a dark suit who stepped aside without a word, and beyond him, just a few feet away, stood Ethan Cole, not behind a desk, not above a skyline, but here, in the same narrow space where everything had changed. And for a moment neither of them spoke, because words felt smaller than what had already passed between them, and Naomi met his gaze the same way she had the night before, steady, unshaken, not impressed by the presence he carried, because she had already seen him without it, and he took a step forward, slower this time, deliberate, as if he understood that this moment could not be rushed, and when he spoke, his voice held none of the distance it once had. "I remember." And it was not just a statement, it was an acknowledgement of her, of what she had done, of something he could not undo even if he wanted to, and Naomi did not respond right away, because she did not need to hear gratitude to know what had happened mattered, and instead she simply watched him, letting him finish what he had come to say, and he exhaled quietly, the weight of words he was not used to carrying settling into his voice. "You saved my life," and there it was, not a transaction, not an offer, just truth. And for the first time since he had walked into her world, he was not the one in control of what came next, and Naomi tilted her head slightly, her expression unchanged, her voice calm, almost gentle as she answered, "I helped," and the simplicity of it shifted something again, something deeper than pride or obligation, something that stripped away the last layer of distance between them, and Ethan nodded once, not correcting her, not arguing, because he understood now that what she had given him could not be measured in the language he was used to, and for